Hey, how you going, fam? Hope you're doing well. For this vlog, I want to talk about horrorcore rap, because today I got a bit triggered by seeing a young rapper just rap about some hectic shit. And he's really not a hectic fella, you know, he's just a nice fella. And yeah, you know, he was doing all these murder bars and rape sort of bars, and it's just like, yeah, I want to tell you about, I guess, you know, my sort of journey in understanding rap and hip-hop and the content that's put in it, and yeah, where it can be. I can't really find any positives out of it. The only positive I find out of horrorcore rap is when the person is actually that dangerous, and them being creative about their violent thoughts is actually helpful for them to not be violent, you know. And in some of the youth work that I've done, yeah, we worked with a young fella who was that dangerous, and he had a record for being that dangerous, and we got him to rap about the thoughts in his head rather than act out in them. So, you know, that's the positive in that. But yeah, I guess, you know, my early exposure to a lot of hip-hop was very horrorcore sort of based, you know. Even if you think back to the late 90s, you had the trend of like non-fiction. You know, Eminem was on that tip too. Cage was another kind of really descriptive, detailed sort of, you know, like you listen to his music and it was as good as watching a horror movie, you know what I mean? And yeah, as well, the 90s, well, the end of the 90s, the start of 2000s was like a point where a lot of the content was very normalized in pop culture. It was really toxic, and ended up, you know, it affected the culture in such a massive way. If you watch the Woodstock 99 documentary, that's I think a really good example that breaks down how comfortably toxic pop culture was in the 90s. Yeah, so, you know, yeah, I had this friend, I'm not going to say his name, but a lot of people knew him in Hobart when I was growing up. He was a really popular fella, and yeah, I was mates with him when I was a teenager. Used to score weed off him. Everyone knew this guy, and he was a friendly guy. You always liked it when you saw him in the mall, because, you know, he'd be real friendly, he'd have a good chat. He'd even shout you coffee, sit down, you know, have a seat. He was a real friendly guy. And then yeah, but he was always into the horrorcore sort of rap. I remember he loved like ICP and Dark Lotus, and yeah, he really loved that extreme shit. And when I was like 16, 17, I lived at this house in North Hobart, and, you know, it was a spot that everyone came around to write raps, and everyone would tag my wall, and it was a big hip-hop house. And this fella used to come around, and I remember him trying to write raps, and it was always about some gory shit, you know. And he just wanted to be that extreme guy in his raps. And I think he really struggled with schizophrenia as well, but it was never really that noticeable, because he always stayed on his meds, and he always seemed very in control of his mental health. But as the years went on, when it wasn't long after he kind of stopped coming around to my house, I think he got off his medication, he started getting on the gear, and yeah, his life got incredibly more toxic, where what he was influenced by became his reality, which, you know, happens to all of us in certain ways. We all are influenced by what's around us, and then it becomes our own reality, and we become the company we keep, you know. But yeah, so after a while of him not taking his medication and getting on the gear, him and another bloke ended up raping and killing a poor woman, and it was fucking hectic. I think it was the winter of 2007. It was a hectic winter. There was heaps of shit drugs around. The winter was particularly cold. There was no sun, no vitamin D. Everyone was coming down off this terrible drugs that were going around the city. Everyone was getting on it in the clubs, you know. And there was a few murders that winter, heaps of suicides. It was like a really, really dark winter. 2007. And I'm sure anyone that can remember it will remember just, yeah, how horrific it was. But yeah, so yeah, my mate, this guy who I, you know, had in my own house, ended up raping and killing someone. And it was a massive shock because it hit the community. Like, all of us actually, I think we heard about it before he'd been caught for it. So the front page of the paper had this picture of this missing woman, and we're all like 18 years old, and you know, Tasmanian whispers are worse than Chinese whispers. The word got around the town in no time. It was fucked up. It was really full on. And yeah, you know, when I went inside, which is like over 10 years later, I was weary of seeing this fella because I just didn't want to see someone that I thought, you know, well, someone that I was close to that had done such a horrible thing. And I've spent a fair bit of time around people that have murdered people before, and but that one just always stuck with me. It always played on my mind massively because I used to listen to all the same rap that he did, you know what I mean? And especially I remember when he did it, I was really listening to Necro, and yeah, and I kind of thought all that shit was cool. And then apparently this fella, before he went and did what he did, he said, you know, I want to know what it's like to kill a bitch. And I think, you know, his mental health is definitely to blame and everything like that, but the influence of horrorcore is definitely a contributor to his actions, you know what I mean? And then yeah, so that was my first kind of big reality check with listening to extreme music, because yeah, he was that guy, and he manifested the things that he wrote down in his raps. It became the reality. And I get really triggered, I think, when I hear a lot of young people rapping about dark shit, you know, rapping about praying to Satan, rapping about all sorts of dark shit because they think it's trendy. But you know, you have to understand that not everyone's brain works the same. We make our decisions in our frontal lobe, which is like the part of our, you know, front part of our brain. And especially when meth and all sorts of shit gets involved, it frazzles that front part of your brain. And that's why, like, so many people that have amazing morals, live amazing lives, and then get on the meth and do something unforgivable, you know. And that's so common because it just frazzles the front of your brain. And then, you know, all of a sudden you're frazzled, or, you know, who knows what makes people flip in that situation, whether it's societal pressure, whether they've got their own demons, their own trauma. But yeah, I really can't help but think that, you know, a lot of my violence that I've behaved with in my life and that's come out in my behavior definitely had roots in what I was influenced by. And I was influenced by a lot of music and movies that were built around violence, you know. Even professional wrestling from the early days, you know. It's an aspect of human behavior, don't get me wrong. Violence, and it's primal fucking instinct shit. And I guess it's our frontal lobe in our brain that helps us decide whether or not to, you know, go with our instincts in those situations. It's that personal judgment, and you know. But yeah, so that's kind of my first story with horrorcore. And I'll tell another story, and it's pretty horrific. So when I was in prison in 2019, I was in there with a guy called Jack Sadler, and yeah, he did some pretty horrific shit where he killed a bloke and he chopped up his body, and he stashed all the body limbs, or the body parts, the limbs or the body parts, and then he disposed of the torso off a cliff. So, you know, it's fucking full on. It's about as full on as it gets. And yeah, I remember when I first saw him in jail, I was like, holy shit. And because I had a lot of mutual friends with the guy that he killed as well. You got to understand, Tas is a small place. Every time there's a murder or something really hectic happens, you know, pretty much guaranteed that I'm 1 degree of separation away from it. And it's a very hard thing to kind of deal with on a daily basis in Tassie, to know. There's 500,000 people on this island, and there's some really dark shit that happens. And if you know people, you know people, you know. It's can make living here feel quite uncomfortable at times, to be honest. But yeah, so this guy chopped up this bloke over a personal issue that they had between them, and yeah, he disposed of his body. And coincidentally, Jack's favorite rapper was Necro, and his most listened to song on Spotify was Dead Body Disposal by Necro. You know, so that was used in the court case against Jack when he was going up for trial against for this murder. They, you know, the prosecution used the fact that he listens to Necro in the you know, on his Spotify. It's pretty hectic, eh? You know what I mean? It's pretty hectic when you think about it. I've become a bit desensitized to a lot of this shit because, you know, it's not often that a month goes by without a massive tragedy. There was a murder just down here in Hobart the other day that was horrible, and you know, the person that did it could have been stopped. You know, it's fucked up. But yeah, so when the news article came out about Jack listening to Necro in the murder trial, it hit the news, and even Necro read it, and then Necro bragged about it on his social media, because Necro's a piece of shit, and anyone that's had anything to do with him will tell you that. Is not a wholesome human, and he's never claimed to be. So, you know, I think that's another massive aspect of all this shit. People, you know, listen to rappers that say some horrific shit, and then they meet them in person, they go, oh, holy shit, they're horrific. And it's like, yeah, because listen to their music, you know. But Necro bragged about it. Actually, he said, oh, the guy that killed that bloke mustn't be a real friend because he got caught and he would have done the job properly. Like, what a goose, you know. And then Jake, the fellow that was murdered, his mother ended up clapping back at Necro in the news and said, you know, how dare you joke about my murdered son, and rightfully so. And then Necro bitched it. He's like, oh, he apologized and withdrew what he said. But yeah, so there's two examples that are directly linked to horrorcore music that are both people that committed horrorcore actions. And we can talk about this and that and what their influences were. It comes down to their own mental health, drugs, their own personal journey, their own family unit, their morals, all sorts of shit that definitely all comes into play when someone does murder, you know. I think when someone does murder in an unjustified fashion, like for example, not revenge or anything, it's got to come from the fact that they've got nothing to lose. They've got nothing to lose. When people don't feel like they care about themselves or anyone cares about them, they've got nothing to lose. And someone with nothing to lose is scary. That's where it's at, you know what I mean? So yeah, for everyone out there watching and listening, feel free to comment your thoughts in the comments. You know, I've got friends that write some pretty extreme shit, and that, you know, they're doing it with a comedic value. They're doing it because they're good at doing it, and they can get away with being that sort of creative in their music. But I've also seen, once again, when you put stuff out to the universe, not everyone's going to interpret it the same. Some people are going to misread it. Some people are going to think it's enabling for their behavior. There's a lot of putrid humans out there that are just waiting to do something dodgy, and all of a sudden they see someone else doing something and they think it gives them the green light, you know. It's a crazy world out there. We have to be careful. Be careful of the influences that shapes our culture and shapes the normalization of this sort of shit. I remember another time when I was young, I was at like a house somewhere, and there was an older guy there who was on some, this guy was a toxic masculine piece of shit. Like, this cunt was, he made me feel uncomfortable. And I remember him sitting there going, do you listen to Necro? And I was like, oh, yeah. He's like, no, you have to listen to Necro. And he's like weirdly standing over me on some fucking rank ass toxic shit. Putrid. Here we are at the bowl. This is the classic old skate bowl. Come back down here for the yarn. Top Ski. How you doing, bro?
Pretty good, how are you?
Yeah, going well, thanks. AAFTBC. Don't bait the goat. Won't be a sec, brother. Old foams. Apple Isle style, baby. I've got a handprint on my piece. Top Ski. Hey, smell. Angry. Such a classic spot, the old bowl. This thrasher gets done up all the time by the legend Top Ski. It's where we used to do the first rap battles back in Taz Battles days. The first a cappella written ones. So this fella come around the thrasher. Hey. The old SBX piece. Top Ski redid it for old High Five, the legend. Yeah. So that's the yarn about horrorcore rap. You know, there's definitely a positive element to people expressing themselves and not acting out on it. But at the same time, we do need to be accountable for what we put out there. You can be reckless, you can do whatever, but you know, karma's karma. And the energy you put out there will come back to you. As I've seen with a couple people in my life, you know, they took in too much of that dark energy and then they ended up doing some dark shit. And trust me, we're fragile creatures. Our spirit, our influence, our minds are fragile. That's okay. Allow yourself to understand your influence and move with autonomy, you know. Move with that sovereignty from what's around you in that sense, and understand what is positively benefiting you and what is actually making your brain think in a darker way. Yeah, big love, fam. Have a good day.